I read I Kissed Dating Goodbye so you don't have to. This is the Ex-Homeschoolers Club, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of growing up a homeschool kid. I'm your host, Jacob Gooden, and we're back for another episode of the best ex-homeschooler show this side of the internet. And you heard me right, I'm talking about I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Now, if you've never heard of this book, first and foremost, be thankful. But basically, this book was like the manual. It was the instruction book that led to pretty much what purity culture looked like from the 90s to almost the 2020s, okay? Now, if you don't know what purity culture is, here it is. Purity culture is a term used to describe a set of beliefs and practices primarily within evangelical Christian communities that emphasize sexual abstinence before marriage and often equate virginity with moral purity and value. It has significant social and psychological implications, impacting individuals' understanding of sexuality, relationships, and their own self-worth. Now, what is I Kissed Dating Goodbye? It is described as this. Tired of the game? Kiss dating goodbye. Dating? Isn't there a better way? I Kiss Dating Goodbye suggests there is. Reorder your romantic life in the light of God's word and find more fulfillment than a date could ever give. A life of sincere love, true purity, and purposeful singleness. Now, a little bit about the author. Joshua Harris, a national speaker, has gained a following both within and outside the homeschool movement. He is a publisher and editor of the New Attitude magazine and is currently in pastoral training at Covenant Life Church in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Okay. Now, when did this book come out? This book came out in 1997, so it is an oldie. It is almost as old as I am. I was born in 1996. And at the time, the author of this book was only 21 years old. Okay. So, this book was retracted in 2019, and Josh has since deconstructed his faith. He pulled this book from publishing along with several of his other books, and I think he has done some things to try to make amends, honestly, for the harm that he caused a lot of teenagers and a lot of young adults from the 90s to the 2010s, basically. So why is this book relevant to the homeschool community, and why am I even talking about it? So this book was relevant because the Harris family in general is very entwined in the homeschool community. Josh's parents, Greg and Sono, I think is his mom's name, they were big major players in the early years of Christian homeschooling, so the 80s and the 90s. His dad, Greg, wrote a book called, I think it was called The Christian Homeschool or something like that. It was a big major catalyst for a lot of people. They were speakers, they would go to events, they were heavily involved in HSLDA, which advocates for homeschoolers, and so his family very much involved in the homeschool realm. What is my history with the Harris family? So I remember, I think my first introduction to them was actually his younger brothers, who wrote a book called Do Hard Things. They came out when I was probably around 13-ish, and that book was really about pushing young adults and young people to do these big, crazy things, to do hard things. They would tell stories about 16-year-olds sailing around the world, or other kids going into war zones and advocating for aid and medical aid and food aid and things like that. And so these really wild stories, and they would do these conferences, and they kind of would push these kids to be, they called them the revolution. So rebels and revolution, mash it together. So that was kind of, at least as far as I know, my introduction to the Harris family. I also remember reading a different Josh Harris book called Sex Isn't the Problem, Lust Is. And that was given to me because I got caught watching some things on the internet, and my parents thought that would be a good book to help me. Well, I had never read this book all the way through. I have read sections of it when I was in high school. I think just things that ended up on blogs and from friends or whatever. So So that was kind of my introduction to the Harris family. Was There's brothers. I had a different book, but I always knew that this existed. I knew that this was a playbook. This was something that got talked about a lot, was this idea of kissing, dating goodbye, courtship is the way, kind of thing. So, my initial thoughts on this book, okay? I hate this book. I really do. This was like a hate read for me. I picked it up. I saw it at a thrift store. I picked it up, and I don't know. I just felt like, I guess, being mean to myself and forcing myself to read it. But it was a difficult read. It was a difficult read. As you can tell, I have a lot of notes throughout this whole thing. A lot of journal entries as well to go along with it. And I'll be honest, I've never really loved what this book stood for. This whole idea of courtship never really resonated with me. I didn't understand how it was like so much more superior than dating. And I didn't have parents that really pushed that on me. So that's something I also want to make clear is like my parents were not like anti-dating. They were not like telling me, oh, you can't kiss someone until you're married. They didn't want me to have sex until I was married. And there was other things. They wanted me to remain sexually pure. But there was a lot of people in the homeschool community who did do courtship. Like they did the thing. And if you don't know what courtship is, it's very much, we're going to get into it as we unpack this book, but it's very much this idea that instead of dating, your family is very involved, and there's very much an intention of like you being a couple with somebody is going to lead to marriage. And it's a very watched process. Family's very much involved in it. There's a lot of like no privacy. Again, a lot of things we're gonna get into as we unpack this book. And it was something I remember like fighting friends on some of these ideas, like kissing before you're married. I remember pushing back. I just had a conversation with a buddy, and we were talking about that and how his idea has changed. He was convinced he was not going to kiss anyone until he was married. I was like, I want to be able to kiss before I'm married. I want to make sure like it looks good on the marriage day. Like I wanted practice. So there's that. The other thing I want to keep in mind as I talk about this and kind of my headspace in reading this book was that the author is like 21, which I would imagine, because I know you don't just write a book overnight. So I would imagine he was between 19 and 20 while really writing this book. That's really young to be giving insane dating advice that like was really like the gold standard in a lot of Christian communities for 20 years. So the other thing that I did while reading this book was I tried to kind of put myself in a position of being like 14 to 16. I'm in puberty. I'm starting to have feelings. Hormones are starting to kick in. Girls are all of a sudden, looking mighty attractive. And so I also tried to put myself in the position of that. And what I came to realize was that a lot of times at that age, when things would arise in my life, I'd get handed a book and told, hey, here, read this. This will help. And there maybe wasn't always a great discussion around it. And this book would have benefited from a lot of discussion, because I don't think that a lot of the things that are taught in this book are things that parents really would have aligned with. Maybe I'm mistaken. I just think that this book warranted more discussion around these things. And you'll even notice as we go through this book, as we get later into it, one of the topics is like not discussing sexual things with the opposite sex. And I think that gets blown out of proportion a little bit in this book as well. So that being said, this book is broken into 4 parts. So this is going to be multiple episodes. So this we're just going to cover part 1. I don't know how much we're going to cover in later ones, but there's going to be multiple episodes to talk about this. But we're going to talk about part 1, which is I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And and we're just going to kind of like unpack that first little bit. So right off the rip, this book equates dating to fast food. Okay. Josh says this: I view dating in a similar light as I view fast food restaurants. It's not wrong to eat there, but something better, something far better, is available. As we'll see, God wants us to seek the best in everything, including our romantic relationships. As Christians, we are too often guilty of making do with the world's model for relationships and missing out on God's best. I thought it was interesting because this whole point right here, he literally starts this section off with saying, I don't think that dating is sinful. However, you make it sound mighty unattractive. Everyone kind of knows, right off the rip, right, that like fast food's not great for you. We know it's unhealthy. We eat it, but we know deep down it's kind of unhealthy. And so comparing dating to that, right, it makes it really unattractive. It's setting the stage. The second point that he makes right after this is rejecting typical dating does not mean that you'll never spend time alone with a guy or a girl. And he goes on to say, I won't say that it's never appropriate to spend time alone with someone. At the right time in a relationship, if the motivation is clear and the setting avoids temptation, going on a date can be healthy. And of course, the hope is that later in this book, he's going to unpack more of that. And what does that actually look like? And what are the guardrails for that? But right off the rip, I was like, man, these things do not sit well with me. I think laying it out in that way, it makes dating sound as if it's somewhat sinful. And I was reminded really early on in reading this that my dad, one of the best things my dad ever said to me, and I don't know why he said this or the full context, but it is just burned in my memory. He would always tell me there's a time and a place for things to be sexual, and you have to learn what the right time and place is. Growing up in California, go to the beach. I think a lot of times you can't control what other people wear or how other people are. And so going to the beach, I think I had a lot of friends who, looked at girls in bikinis and it would turn them on or it would sexually excite them or whatever. And I think maybe it had to do with a conversation around that where my dad was like, the beach is not a sexual place. It doesn't have to be. You can learn to control your emotions while you're at the beach, and just have fun. And so anyway, that's a statement that's always really stuck with me. It's just there's a time and a place for things to be sexual, and you have to learn when that time and that place is. So, all right, let's move on. Chapter 1, Smart Love is what this chapter is entitled. And, man, he kicks it off with a doozy. Okay, so he kicks this chapter off with a story about a bride and a groom. It's their wedding day. They're getting married. They're exchanging their vows. And as they're exchanging their vows, the bride is looking at her groom, and all of a sudden, these women start popping up behind him. And she's like, who are these people? And he has to confess to her that they're past relationships. They're past girlfriends. And she's upset, right? Because she's like, well, why are they here or whatever? And he's like, well, I gave pieces of my heart to these people. And so, I can't get that back. But everything I have left is yours, right? And she wakes up from the dream and she's upset and she's distraught and she's even thinking about her own relationships of the past and how she's given her heart away and things like that and how they can never get that back. And if only they had just waited, basically. If they had waited, it could have just been perfect, kind of a thing. And I was like, yikes. First and foremost, yikes. That story is wild. Josh then follows it up with his own relationship experience, and he doesn't really go into detail about his relationships, but he says that he has all these past relationships from high school and being a kid and things that he regrets because they took him away. They gave pieces of himself away to these other people. Now, I want to say this. There's a lot of stories in this book that I don't really know if they're true. This being one of them, of this woman sending him a letter or an email and saying, I had this dream. I'm not going to say that they're not real, but there's a lot of conveniently illustrated stories throughout this whole book that just seem a little bit too good to be true. The other thing that this made me think about was the fact that the insecurity level that you have to compare yourself to somebody's past. And I'm not going to say that I haven't done that. I haven't been there. But I even know that for myself, the first time I ever had sex, afterwards, I had this just feeling of like, I've given this piece of myself away. I've given my heart away. I've given my heart away other places too, in other relationships. But like, it was like tied to my worth. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that like my worth is not dependent on that. Like I am a person, and we give pieces of ourselves away. We do. But just because I give those pieces away and maybe they break my heart or they're not reciprocated or whatever, it doesn't make me less of a human. It doesn't make me less of a person. It doesn't make me capable of giving all of myself to somebody. And so this is a common theme throughout this whole book, is this like constant, just like giving away of the heart and it being shattered into little pieces. And that's like not holy, and that's sinful, and like you need to not do that. You need to just be like so certain. And I think that's the problem here, is that the certainty. How can you be certain that this is your person without dating, without this intentionality? And he's going to get into some of the ways. So I also wanted to bring up this quote that's later in this book, later in this chapter. And it says, let me flip to it here. It says, does love motivate the guy who sleeps with his girlfriend when it will scar her emotionally and damage her relationship with God? Does sincerity motivate the girl who leads a guy along and breaks up with him when she finds someone better? No, both people exemplify selfish motivation. They need to get smart and realize how their actions affect others. I read that, and my instant thought that I jotted down was, who hurt you, Josh? Like, who hurt you? What did they do? Like, what was this thing that led you to that? Because I know that people can be selfish. I get it. I think a lot of people give of themselves with this understanding that this might not work out. It might not. And that's okay. We're going to get hurt as people. And that is, I think, one of the biggest damaging points of this whole book, is there's this big push of like not getting hurt. And that's why I say, like, who hurt you, Josh? Because like there's this certainty of, we have to know that this is the person I want to spend my time with and I want to be with that person. Well, how do you know that without taking a risk, right? How do you know that without dating, without putting yourself out there, without kind of being vulnerable with yourself? So I also want to take a brief second to talk about, because it's going to come out throughout this whole book, sexual sin. What is it? Where is the line? What is it defined as? This book is not going to tell you what that is. It's going to bring it up multiple times. It's going to bring it up. It's going to say, you don't want to be sexually impure. You don't want to do all of these things. But then it will never tell you where the line is crossed. It's kind of that whole, like, I don't know porn. I don't know what the line is for porn, but I know it when I see it, kind of a whole argument. That's the argument that I hear made a lot of times for sexual sin. And nobody ever in the history of my upbringing either has really been able to tell me definitively, line in the sand, this is sexual sin, this is not. Part of that is it's just not always clear in the Bible. I think most people would agree sexual sin in the context of the Bible and Christianity is like, sex before marriage, sexual sin. But when it comes to things like kissing, hand-holding, heavy petting, like even masturbation, those types of things, they just all sit in this gray area, and it's like very almost like up to the user, but yet we also judge each other if we decide that those things are okay for us or not okay. So I think that is like a really hard place to be in as a teenage kid, right? Because you're looking for the lines. You're looking to know where the boundaries are and where you can, play inside of. So that's like, that's what I've been thinking throughout this whole thing, is I'm like, I never knew the boundary lines. I knew that sex outside of marriage was bad. I knew that pornography was bad. My parents never explicitly said masturbation was bad. My parents never said kissing was bad or hand holding. But I knew people who all of that was bad. All of that was sexual sin. Other things were sexual sin. Like just the act of touching someone of the opposite sex could be misconstrued as sexual sin. So anyway, the other thing that comes up in this book a lot is the maintaining of virginity. And he says it multiple ways in the book, but basically the most common way is he says, these people maintain virginity, but only in the technical sense. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? And I think it's like running of the mind a little bit, I think is what he's getting at, right? It's like, maybe you fantasize about it a little bit, you fantasize about being with that somebody, or maybe you push those lines like we're talking about because those lines are blurry. Maybe us making out was crossing a boundary, and, maybe she sat on his lap or, whatever. But because of the fact that none of it is actually like structured to actually represent anything, if that makes sense. Like there is no hard line in the sand. As a 14-year-old, and remember, I'm reading this from the perspective of a 14-year-old kid, I would be so confused. And I would also be questioning at all times, did I cross the line? Okay? I had this thought about this person, about this girl. Let me give you an example. I knew plenty of girls, very attractive, very wonderful ladies. I'm also straight, okay? So, and I'm speaking primarily, this book is written from primarily like heterosexual perspective, and that's also I'm straight, okay? That's where I come from. So girls were attractive. And I remember catching myself and being like, oh, is even me thinking that this girl looks pretty, is that crossing a line? Is that crossing a line? I don't know. Nobody could tell me, is that crossing a line? I find this person attractive. Am I crossing a line by saying that, by thinking that? Those were kind of some of the things sometimes that were running through my head as I'm navigating puberty, as I'm navigating early teenage years of like, is this right? Is this wrong? So we're going to jump ahead a little bit. Chapter 2. This is Josh's negative tendencies of dating. I'm pulling up, what does the chapter say? Okay, the 7 habits of highly defective dating is what this chapter is titled. A lot of his chapters kick off with some kind of story, and then we talk about it, right? This particular chapter starts off, and he's describing him being in youth group and his pastor telling a story of a couple who, they were dating, they had a great dating relationship, things got physical, they ended up having sex, and then they broke up. And many, many years later, they're at a high school reunion, and this youth pastor is also there, I guess. And he's talking to them, and he's asking them how they are, and both of them confess this, like, oh, like it's so hard to see this other person because, like, there's like an open wound still. It's just like, it's I've just never gotten over that experience, right? I gave myself to them, and so even though they've moved past it, they're significantly older, they're both like married and have kids, and they're just like in different places of life, they never got over it. I read that, and my initial note that I jotted down was like, sounds like these people need therapy. Sounds like they need to know how to find closure in a relationship. Now Josh uses that story to emphasize that, like, the youth pastor tells this story, and then he's like, okay, so now you're gonna tell me like how to not fall into this pitfall, and he says the pastor basically is like, if only they'd had more self-control, this wouldn't have happened. And Josh goes on to argue that he's like, well, I don't think that's good enough, right? And he's starting to formulate this, like, maybe dating is just bad. Maybe dating is the problem, not the self-control thing. I look at that and I go, I think teaching people to be emotionally healthy, to not carry the baggage of unresolved relationships, probably the better strategy here. I think the self-control is also important, and learning that and knowing where your boundaries are and knowing you don't want to cross this, that, or the other, those are important. You can't really have those things for yourself if you also don't have that healthy emotional status, right? And so I think he's throwing out like the baby with the bathwater, right? He's throwing out all of dating because he's like, well, I know that I can't trust myself with self-control. That's another thing that continually comes up in this book. And the thing that I've learned about self-control is that I grew up in an environment where very much was told, the body is sinful, human desires are sinful, and those are the things we crave, right? And so when it comes to puberty and it comes to your sexual awakening, you can't trust your body because your body is craving things, right? Especially as a guy, right? Like, we get horny, and the thing with guys is that, like, guys get horny and then we can't hide it, right? We fucking pop a boner, like, it just happens. Like, there is a physical example of we are horny, and everybody knows. There's a flag goes up. And I think what's so hard about, like, telling kids that, like, well, the body is sinful and the body is evil and it wants evil things, and so when it comes to the sex level of things, it's frustrating for me because I'm constantly in denial of my body. I'm telling my body that no, it doesn't actually want that. No, it's wrong. Like, the way you're reacting to this is wrong and sinful. And what that created for me in particular is a disconnect between what my body was telling me I needed and what I was just in my brain telling me I actually needed. And how that's played out now in my life is that, like, I have ignored signs in my life that would have been helpful to know. I've gotten sick because I've ignored things in my body. I've had to have surgery. I had a freaking kidney stone because I didn't trust things in my body, and I didn't trust listening to my body and what my body was telling me. And as I've gotten older, and specifically in the last 2 years, as I've started to learn to tap into that and learn to ask myself, what is it that you need? Is it rest? Do you need water? Do you need to be cleaned? How do you need to be serviced, basically, is the way I kind of look at it. I've learned a lot more about myself and the things that I like and the things that I dislike. And I've learned how to pick up on triggers within myself of I'm getting to this point where my body is so filled with whatever that it would used to result in, like, an explosion of emotion that would burn me out. And I would get angry or I'd be upset and I'd punch a hole in the wall. And then now I'm learning to tamper it down. It's not always perfect, but I'm learning to, like, recognize when I'm going to those places and say, okay, no, like, let's take a minute, let's take a beat, listen, what do I need? Breathe. And so I can regulate that a lot more. Those are things that we never talked about because, again, my understanding, what I felt like I was being told, your body is sinful. The things that your body is craving are wrong. They're evil. They're wicked. You should not want those things. You should only want what God wants for you. Okay? But my body is telling me I want this. So you tamp it down. You tamp it down. You tamp it down. And eventually it just explodes. So what are the 7 defective habits of dating? Okay? So Josh lists them out like this. He says, here they are. Dating leads to intimacy, but not necessarily commitment. Dating skips the friendship stage of relationship. Dating often mistakes a physical relationship for love. Dating often isolates a couple from other vital relationships. Dating, in many cases, distracts young adults from the primary responsibility of preparing for the future. Dating can cause discontentment with God's gifts of singleness. Dating creates an artificial environment for evaluating another person's character. Now, I could go into all of these. I'm not going to because I just don't feel like I have the time to do it. But I'm going to touch on a couple of the ones that spoke most to me. So the first one I'm going to touch on, dating leads to intimacy, but not necessarily commitment. Now, this particular section of his book, he pretty much is primarily talking to high school kids. And he says this, in most cases, especially in high school, dating is short-term, serving the needs of the moment. People date because they want to enjoy the emotional and even physical benefits of intimacy without the responsibility of real commitment. He goes on to kind of like blame culture and say, we live in this culture that is like, it's like fast, it's entertainment driven. It's all about the now. It's all about like me, 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 me. And in further on in this section, he talks about the shift of dating from the going into the 20th century and how dating shifted into, as the Industrial Revolution started, and all of a sudden we started having more access to cars, and we started having more access to third spaces and things like that. Dating went from this very very structured kind of, it was with the intention of dating to all of a sudden it could be a form of entertainment, so to speak. And he's like kind of advocating for going back to the way it was before because it was so much better. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm all for progress. I think we move forward, we iterate, we evolve. So hearing that he wants to go back to dating from like the 1800s was not really a huge turn on for me. But going back to what he was saying about, short-term relationships in high school, I can agree with the guy that most high school relationships probably not going to last. But I think what's hard is, again, like, he goes to this place of like, just throw it out, like, don't even do it, because there's like essentially no good way to do it. So just like, don't even bother. And I think that's really hard when, again, we're talking about teenagers who were hormonal, we're changing, we're having our sexual awakenings, sex drives are kicking in. And the solution he gives is like, basically wait until you can get married. Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to get married at 16. I'm not going to get married even at 18 a lot of times. And so because there's no conversation around what is our bodies going through, what are we experiencing as just human beings, and what is naturally evolving and changing in our bodies, like, we're met with this, like, just give it up, give it to God, and like, be good, be happy. But again, we're denying ourselves, we're denying our flesh, which comes back and bites us in the butt to some degree. The next habit that he talks about, or the next one I want to talk about, is dating often mistakes physical relationship for love. Okay. He has this to say about it. When we consider that our culture as a whole regards the word love and sex interchangeably, we shouldn't be surprised that many dating relationships mistake physical attraction and sexual intimacy for true love. Sadly, many Christians in dating relationships reflect this false mindset. I instantly wrote down like, don't think so. Don't think so. The number of people who I've met, both in the church, outside of the church, like, and you would ask them, like, if you ask them to define love, sex, what are they? Most people are going to say they're like two separate things. Love, a lot of times, can like include sex, but like, I don't think that it's completely interchangeable, and I think he's exaggerating the number of people who would think that way. And I think he does it because then he can argue for like God's love is like the true love, and that's the only thing we should be imitating, right? That's the only thing. So we have to wait. We have to like hold off on love because there's like a proper way to do it. So he conflates like anybody who's not inside of church to be like, well, their definition of love equals sex. I just don't think that that's true. Like, you just ask somebody who didn't grow up in church, what's your definition of love? They're probably going to talk about some of the same things that we would talk about in a church environment. This, like, giving of one another, right? This, like, surrendering of ourselves, serving each other, right? Love is this, it's also the hormones in your brain that are firing off and in your body, right? So you feel, right? You got love hormones and things like that. Love is just like so much more than sex, and I think most people recognize that. It's just wild to hear from a 21-year-old that it's like that to him is how the world views it. So, anyway, we're gonna keep moving. Okay, next up, dating distracts from preparing for the future. Okay. We full forward another couple pages. One of the saddest tendencies of dating is to distract young adults from developing their God-given abilities and skills. Instead of equipping themselves with character, education, and experience necessary to succeed in life, many allow themselves to be consumed by the present needs that dating emphasizes. Dating's only a distraction if you let it be a distraction. I went through a honeymoon phase when I started dating people. I think every relationship does. But this narrative of like, well, you could be doing better things with your time. You're ignoring the fact that like getting to know people has value. Okay? Getting to know somebody has value. Dating somebody and spending time with them, going to the movies, doing stupid stuff, shooting them a text message, shooting them an email, asking how they are. Like, those things have value. We build relationships in doing that. I can learn new skills from literally being in a relationship with somebody, right? You go do something they enjoy, they come do something you enjoy. Like, I think he really just views it as like, well, when you're in a relationship, it's just all about like the cutesy, we make out and we hold hands and we have sex and we, do all these things, the superficial stuff that comes along with having a relationship. And I think he just forgets about the fact that it's like a lot of people, when they're in a relationship, it's also about building a friendship. It's also about building connection and finding out if this is somebody you want to invest your time and energy into. The other thing I wrote down was that, he claims dating is a waste of time. And I said, I hate to break it to you, but there's a billion other things I could have done besides read this dumbass book. And most of them would have taught me a new skill or something actually of value. So that's my take on that particular one. Let's jump ahead a little bit more. We're going to talk about the negative characteristic of dating creates an artificial environment for evaluating another person's character. It creates an artificial environment for two people to interact. As a result, each person can easily convey an equally artificial image. He uses this example, okay? In the driveway of our house, we have a basketball hoop that we can adjust to different heights. When I lower the hoop 3 feet from its normal setting, I can look like a pretty good basketball player. Dunking is no problem. I glide across the pavement and slam the ball down every time. But my skill exists only because I've lowered the standards. I'm not playing in a real environment. Put me in a court with a 10-foot hoop, and I'm back to being a white boy who can't jump. He talks about in marriage, you need to take breaks from the stress of kids, and work, you need to just get away for a bit. But two people weighing the possibility of marriage need to make sure that they don't just interact within the fun, romantic setting of dating. Their priority should be to get away. Their priority shouldn't be, getting away from real life. They need a strong dose of objective reality. They need to see each other in real life setting of family and friends. They need to watch each other serving and working. How does he interact with the people who know him best? How does she react to things when things don't go perfectly? I think there's a honeymoon phase in relationships. I experienced it. While I was dating, we had a lot of fun. We were in college. We go do fun stuff. We go to concerts. We go get dinner. We had a lot of fun. Maddie also saw me at literally my lowest. She was with me when I had to have surgery on my back because I woke up one morning and I had a cyst on my back that had exploded, and I woke up in a pool of blood. And she was with me to take me to the ER. She was with me to take me to surgery, to pick me up from surgery, to help pack the gauze and clean the wound. Because I don't know about you, I can't reach my back. I can't see my back very well. So doing it alone was not easy. She also saw me through literally one of the hardest deaths of my entire life, the death of my grandma. She was with me from the decline, the whole decline of that person getting sick and eventually dying. If those aren't real things, then and if your dating relationship doesn't involve that reality where you're involving that person, what is your dating reality? And I think it does come to, what are your goals? What are your goals with dating, right? When I started dating, I very much wanted to get to know people better. I wanted to have fun. I wanted a little bit more of that exclusivity of one-on-one time with the opposite sex. But I also had an intention of I was looking for somebody that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. If my goal had just been, I want to just have fun, that would look totally different. And I never would have expected Maddie in a million years to take care of me in the way she did if I was just like, our relationship is only about fun. Part of the issue with this I kiss dating goodbye philosophy, so to speak, and painting it in such a way of this is the way God wants you to do it. It becomes so about intentionality of like, what are you doing? And here's the guardrails and you have to see each other for who you really are and all these types of things. It's like, that doesn't happen overnight. That doesn't just happen in a lab. Like, Josh clearly wants to set up a lab, be able to control all the factors and make this perfect instance happen. It's just not the way reality works. I hate to break it to you. It's not the way it works. That argument, again, of like, it's a distraction. It's only artificial and you're not actually seeing the person for who they are. Like, those can be realities inside of dating. Those very much can be. However, like, it doesn't have to be. And it can take time to find the right person. So, like, I just get confused and I get upset when he paints this as, like, the perfect only way to ever do it. Chapter 3, a new attitude, I think is what it's called. And basically, yeah, a new attitude. So 5 attitude changes that help you avoid defective dating. Okay. In this chapter, he's going to outline those. Here they are. Every relationship is an opportunity to model Christ's love. My unmarried years are a gift from God. Intimacy is the reward of commitment, and I don't need to pursue a romantic relationship before I am ready for marriage. I cannot own someone outside of marriage, and own is in quotations. And lastly, I will avoid situations that could compromise the purity of my body or my mind. Again, I'm not going to cover all these. I'm just going to kind of like hit my favorites, I guess you could say. But we're going to start off. The unmarried years are a gift from God. He gives this example of this guy named Michael. He says, when Michael adopts a new attitude that views singleness as a gift, he learns to be content with friendship during the time God wants him to remain single. As a result, Michael can clear his life of the clutter that short-term relationships contribute to his life. With his newly freed time and energy, Michael can pursue more effective ministry and deeper friendships with people of both genders. Until you realize God's gift of your singleness, you'll probably miss out on the incredible opportunities it holds. Perhaps even now, you can think of an opportunity you could grasp if you let go of the dating mindset. As a single, you have the freedom right now to explore, study, and tackle the world. No other time in your life will offer these chances. Why are we painting dating and romantic relationships as a waste of time? As a waste of resources? I understand the argument that if you just focus so much on the superficiality of your relationship, and I just have to be in a relationship because I have to be in a relationship, and I just have to be in a relationship because it makes me feel good, and I don't actually want to get to know somebody deeper. Like, yeah, that's a fucking problem. Excuse my language. You can do all the things he describes. Learning new skills, deepening friendships. All of those things can happen while you're dating. They just can. It's all about how you structure your life, how you set aside time for people, how you build out your calendar. And again, I'm realizing as I'm saying these things, it all goes back to that self-control aspect that we talked about earlier. Josh doesn't believe that you can have self-control. He just doesn't. It's very clear. You can't be trusted to date. You can't be trusted to be around the opposite sex because you lack self-control. You're not in touch with your body. Everything your body wants is wrong, is evil, is sinful, is bad. It's not. It just plain and simple is not, right? I dated my wife while we were in college, okay? When you're in college, you got a lot of shit you got to do. You got to go to class. You got to make sure you're fed. You got to do your homework. You got to juggle friendships, other responsibilities, clubs, extracurriculars, a job, like all kinds of different stuff. It was not easy. And there was a honeymoon phase of like, I just wanted to spend every minute I could with her. We also were in most of the same classes together, so I had that working to my advantage. But we didn't have every class together. What I quickly learned was like, the more I just spent only my time invested in her and on her, my grades hurt a little bit, right? I let things slide, whatever. And so our relationship changed. The structure of it changed. We took time to do homework. We took time to have friendships outside of just the two of us. We went to clubs, not together. We did things. We had classes, not together. Like, we learned exterior skills. We had conversations with other people. We just did other stuff that didn't involve each other. It wasn't that hard. It just was a matter of sitting down and coming up with a calendar that worked for us. Setting the intention of what we wanted to do. We both knew we wanted to graduate. What is it going to take to do that? Let's do it. It just frustrates me. Again, this narrative. You can't be trusted, so just don't do it. What is that logic? All right, moving on. I cannot own someone outside of marriage. What he says in the book, what I have highlighted is, the old attitude says we can play marriage if we really love someone. But the new attitude, he's talking about dating. So the old attitude of dating, we can play marriage if we really love someone. But the new attitude views a claim on another person's time, affection, and future before marriage as unwarranted. He goes on to give an example of Sarah and Philip, and he says that they realized they needed to end their relationship as it now existed. By staking a claim on each other, they stifled their individual growth and needlessly consumed energy that should have been directed into service and preparation for the future. I've said it before, I'll say it again. What is this notion? What is this thought process of dating is a waste of time because you are only focused on one other person and you cannot focus on anything else? I will not and I cannot understand it. Like, I just can't. I put, spoiler alert, you can do both things. It's called time management and self-control. Okay. The last section of the new attitude is that I want to talk about is I will avoid situations that could compromise the purity of my body or my mind. I'm going to read this whole section. It's not very long. It's a couple paragraphs. And then we're going to talk about it. Okay. So here we go. Jessica, age 16, is a good girl who is unfortunately very naive. Even though she's a virgin and has committed to saving sex for marriage, she places herself in compromising situations with her older boyfriend. Homework at her house when her mom is gone, hiking alone, ending their dates in his parked car. If Jessica were honest, she'd admit that she likes the excitement of these situations. She thinks it's very romantic, and it gives her a feeling of control over her boyfriend, who, to be quite honest, will go as far in their physical relationship as Jessica will allow. But when Jessica takes on a new attitude, she sees that purity consists of more than remaining a virgin. When she honestly examines her relationship with her boyfriend, she realizes that she has left the direction of purity. To get back on course, she has to drastically change her lifestyle. First, she ends the relationship with her boyfriend because they focus on the physical aspect. Then she commits to fleeing those settings that lend themselves to compromise. Where, when, and with whom you choose to spend your time reveals your true commitment to purity. Do you need to examine your tendencies? If you do, make sure that you avoid placing yourself in settings that encourage temptation. He advocates for breaking up because a relationship is too physical. Notice how he doesn't advocate for, let's have a conversation about this. Let's try to be mature. Let's try to be adults. Jessica wants to set new boundaries in their relationship. And maybe it would have resulted in them breaking up. Maybe not. She could have easily gone to her boyfriend and said, hey, look, we're making out too much in the car. I just want to cool off a little bit. Let's not do that, whatever. And he could have maybe been very receptive, maybe not. would have maybe spoken to his character of who he is as a person. But the fact that it's just an instant go to break it off. Dating equal bad. It's like there's no saving this relationship because it's already gone to that place, and thus it could just go back. We also get again into that gray area of sexual sin. Right, wrong, what is too far? Where are the boundaries? And he's kind of advocating for the fact that he's like, she had realized that maybe things they were doing were past the boundaries that she felt comfortable or what she viewed as sexual sin. That's fine. Again, communication. One of the things that I've come to realize a lot as I unpack my religious past, as I unpack purity culture, it all came down to lack of communication, lack of talking about anything, sex, emotions, feelings, the like physical, like your body, right? Talking about what actually those things look like. And so there's this lack of communication around those things. So there's lack of education around those things. And because there's lack of education around those things, people just don't know. They just don't know. This author is so obsessed with this idea of giving everything up to God that you can't like experience this like fullness without surrendering yourself to God, which like, what does that even mean? I was religious and I still don't know that I fully have an answer as to what that means. Because again, he doesn't talk about what it looks like. The implication that he keeps outlining is the like, give up all the dating. You should only be focused on, especially if you're in high school, getting through school, learning new skills, and like serving God. Okay? It's very clear within these first 3 chapters that Josh got hurt dating. Somebody hurt him. And he said, throw it all away. I don't want to date anybody until I'm literally going to marry them. And you know what? I want to make sure that no other Christian kid dates either. That is like insane to me. It's insane. It's an insane way of thinking. This book gets me really heated, as you can tell. Gets a lot of people really heated. That's just the first 3 chapters. I'm going to keep talking more and more about this because I think it's important. It's taken me a really long time. I'm 28. I'm going to be 29 this year. It's taken me a really long time to unpack some of these concepts that I grew up with around purity culture, around sexual sin, around dating. A lot of the things in this book, I think, they're presented as if they're factual. They're presented as if they have backing by the Bible, and there are Bible verses throughout this whole thing. But at the end of the day, what I've come to realize is that this book is just opinion. It's just Josh's experience. And I really wrestled with making this particular episode because I felt like, well, I need to come with the facts. I have to come with something to combat everything that he says and statistics and all these things. And so it was taking me a really long time to compile all these things. And what I realized was the fact that this book is all opinion. And so I can combat it with opinion and experience because that's all it is. So again, you can tell I'm a little fired up. That was part 1 of this whole book. 3 chapters in, I Kiss Dating Goodbye. There's going to be more. There's going to be more to come. I got a lot of notes. We're going to keep talking about it. I would love to hear your stories about purity culture. If you're willing to share them, you can hit me up, exhsclub@gmail.com, or on socials at exhsclub. The DMs are open. I'd love to know your experience with it. You can tell I'm passionate about it. I want to keep talking about it. I want to keep learning about it. I think I got off pretty scot-free when it comes to a lot of this stuff. I know I've got hang-ups around a lot of things involving sex, but I know people who've got it a lot worse than I do. So yeah, I'm going to keep talking about this. We'll see. It might be kind of spaced out a little bit. We're going to see what this ends up looking like, but thank you for listening. If you made it this far, you're amazing. I would appreciate if you do all of the things you know how to do. Comment, like, subscribe, share it with a friend. You know, all the things that help get this pushed out. to the right audience. Again, if you want to reach out to me, exhclub@gmail.com. Would love to hear your stories. Would love to chat with you, unpack more of this together, because it's important, and we're not alone in our experiences. So yeah, that's all I got. Until next time, peace and love.